right. Tonight we have Laurie Sheppard. Laurie is a dedicated volunteer at Hagerman National Wildlife Refuge, where she monitors monarchs and the elusive Frosted Elfin. She's often also a frequent contributor to our newsletter for the chapter and has a deep knowledge and passion for Texas wildlife and the Blackland Prairie Chapter through engaging articles and insightful talks. Thank you, Laurie.
It's green. I guess everyone can hear me because I can hear myself. This presentation is one that I did once before at Friends of Hagerman second Saturday program. If you're ever looking for AT, I'll give you a pitch. Second Saturday of the month, we always have some sort of a nature program. So come up and visit us. Tonight, I'm going to explore the disappearing butterflies species in Grayson County in Texas. These were the headlines in early March this year. And you might notice these are not clickbait sites that are using these really dramatic headlines. It's Reuters, ABC News, The Guardian. It was on just about everything you could see, that butterfly populations were plummeting. They were referring to a study that was done on various monitoring programs between the year 2000 and the year 2020. They were all butterfly monitoring programs, and the years are significant because by 2000, there were a lot of monitoring programs that were up and running. And in 2020, COVID came, and a lot of them had to shut down. So it was a good way to mark a beginning and an end and look at a significant amount of data. They looked at 76,000 surveys covering 12.6 million records from 35 different monitoring programs in the continental US. They ultimately included 342 butterfly species in the study, and of those, 114 sustained losses of 42% or more, and 107 had losses of 50% or more. Only 9 of the butterflies surveyed out of 342 showed gains. So butterflies are having a problem. Butterflies are Lepidoptera. Those are the scaled-winged insects, and includes both butterflies and moths. To give you some perspective, there's 177,500 Lepidoptera worldwide. In the United States, or actually butterflies alone, it's 17,500. So about 10% of the Lepidoptera are actually butterflies. And in the United States, we have 750 species, and 442 of those can be found in Texas. So it's pretty significant for us. We're in the best place to look at butterflies. It's great. There are, well, as of the time I wrote this, there were 98 species identified in Grayson County. Melanie helped me find 2 more, so we had 100. And then this year, I got 1 more at the Butterfly Garden in, I guess it was in October, early October. We got an orange skipperling that lost its way from the valley and came up to visit us. So we're at 101 for Grayson County, which is pretty cool. And Collin County has almost the same. When I once combined both of us, we end up at somewhere around 110 or 120, I don't remember what the exact number was, species of butterflies that you can see in one of our 2 counties. So I wanted to look at how many of those were at risk. The way this all started, in 2009, I was living in Frisco and looking for new places to explore, and I discovered Hagerman, and I just fell in love with the place. I just kept coming back. And so I started doing my summer butterflying up in Grayson County. Butterflies and Moths of North America is a website. I refer to it as BMONA. And they used to have all of the historical records for butterflies in every county. Actually, they're pretty much all over the place. And you can go on their website and find out more about different butterflies there. At that time, there were 63 species by 2015 in Grayson County. I just kept searching for more all the time. I was on the communications committee for Friends of Hagerman, so I was writing different articles for newsletters. And in 2017, I did a series called Beyond the Butterfly Garden. And you can still find that series available, and it tells you by month what kinds of things you might see and where you might see them outside of a garden. A lot of butterflies don't ever come to a garden. In 2020, it was the year of COVID. Our butterfly garden that had started or was opened in 2015 and was well maintained to that point. Because of COVID, we couldn't meet to do all the weeding and all that stuff. And if you have a 1/4 acre of prime land and it's watered all the time, you end up with a lot of things you don't really want. So we have been trying to restore it, and Bring Back the Monarchs to Texas has been very generous and given us grants. And we are well on the way to restoring our butterfly garden, which has helped us immensely in keeping track of what butterflies we have. You can find all this stuff at friendsofhagerman.org. So you might wonder, why is it important to go for all these new species? Why am I looking? Because how will you ever know what you're losing if you don't know what you have? You have to know what you have first. I ended up finding an at-risk butterfly in 2017. I was out looking around like I was, just looking for new butterflies wherever I could find them. And I take photos of whatever I see wherever I go. Then I come home and use field guides to identify if I don't already know what it is. And I keep a list, obviously. I wouldn't know I have 101 butterflies in Grayson County if I didn't keep a list. So I just identified it as a Frosted Elfin and moved on. At the end of the year, I was asked to write a series of blog posts. We were doing blogs then because it was before Facebook was real big. And I was asked to write about the 10 new butterflies I had found that year. And as I was exploring, I found out that this little Frosted Elfin was a conservation status of 3 out of 5, which means it's kind of at risk. So I did a little more research and got in touch with Fish and Wildlife people in Washington who were they were setting up a study to find out more about Frosted Elfins, because apparently they are gone from some of their native range, just extirpated. And they weren't really aware of how secure they were anywhere else. So we were involved for several years reporting our sightings when we saw Frosted Elfins. We had a survey site that we would monitor and report on. And also in 2018, the North American Butterfly Association held a monitoring program across Texas, or across East Texas, that was funded by the Texas Parks and Wildlife Conservation Plates in order to find out what the status was. We were looking at places that either had the host plants or historically had the butterflies. And some places that we expected to find them, we didn't, but we did find them in a few places that were unexpected, so that was good. Talking about conservation status, you might wonder, well, you throw that around and who says? there's an international recognition of conservation status by several organizations. Excuse me. The International Union for Conservation of Nature, founded in 1948, is focused on the conservation and sustainability of natural resources. They might look at things like elephants in Africa, or the Sumatra rhinoceros in China, or the ivory-billed woodpecker in Louisiana. Following along with that, there was a convention on the international trade in endangered species of wild fauna and flora, also known as CITES. And they developed a 1963 treaty that protected endangered species from the threats of international trade. Some of you might remember that in 2014, a Dallas man was prosecuted for taking protected hummingbirds from Mexico, killing them, drying them, and selling them as good luck charms. Yeah, a Dallas man. He, unfortunately for him, tried to sell them to an undercover agent for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and it didn't go well for him. Within the United States, there's the Endangered Species Act of 1973, and that's applied by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. That builds upon the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918, the Lacey Act of 1900, and some others. That Dallas man, he was found in violation of CITES, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, the Lacey Act, federal smuggling laws, and Texas state laws. So it's always nice when the good things happen, the right things happen. The Xerces Society also does some ranking of conservation status. They are an international nonprofit organization that protects the natural world through the conservation of invertebrates and their habitats. NatureServe is also another one. NatureServe is the one that gave me a conservation status of 3. They do global, they rank species of all types and indicate the rarity of the species on a global scale. The Endangered Species Act is really only talking about us. The Endangered Species Act is the primary law in the United States protecting and conserving species. And what they are trying to do is prevent species from becoming extinct, and when they are able to, recovering them to sustainable levels. It is fully administered by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they create and maintain the Endangered Species List, which is a listing of all imperiled species or plants or wildlife. They are either ranked as threatened or endangered. Threatened means that in the foreseeable future, they could become extinct. Endangered means there's a risk, they're in imminent risk of extinction. Examples of threatened would be something like the American bumblebee. We know that their numbers are declining, they're having trouble, but with help, they probably can recover. Endangered is something more like the North Atlantic right whale. There are 366 of those in existence when it got put on the endangered species list, and despite protections, their numbers are not increasing. So there are different things that are on these lists. And you might notice that I'm referring to butterflies as imperiled or at risk rather than endangered, because endangered means at risk of extinction now. And so we need to be careful about using that term. There are 5 factors that impact species and might cause them to be put on the endangered species list. First, there's the present or threatened destruction, modification, or curtailment of a species' natural habitat or range. Many of us are old enough maybe to remember the spotted owls out on the northwest, and all the furor from all of the people who wanted to cut down all the trees, and people were trying to protect the trees for the spotted owls. Well, the spotted owls won, but all the trees also have attracted the barred owls, and the barred owls are now threatening the spotted owls. So sometimes what you try to do doesn't work out perfectly, but they're working on it. Overutilization for commercial, recreation, scientific, or educational purposes. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service came into being partially because of the snowy egret. Back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, women had these beautiful hats, and they liked having these lovely pluming feathers on their hats. And hunters almost hunted snowy owls or snowy egrets to extinction, taking their plumes, taking their breeding plumage. So that's another example of overutilization. Disease or predation can decimate a species. Brian's looking at bats. White-nosed bat syndrome is affecting 12 different endangered bat species. Something needs to be done to help them. The inadequacy of existing regulatory mechanisms. If we didn't have hunting regulations and fishing regulations, some species might be hunted to extinction. The American bison almost was. There's examples of it all around. Nicotinoids and the damage that they're doing to pollinators. That's another one of those. It wasn't regulated, they put it in all the fields, and then all of a sudden, all the bees are dropping dead. So there's also other natural or man-made factors which affect the species' survival. DDT. We're all familiar with Rachel Carson in the second spring. DDT was creating a situation where eagles would mate and lay eggs, but the eggs were not viable because the shells were all weak and collapsed. It was the man-made factor of putting out DDT that affected the species' survival. And they had gone down to very low numbers. And they are the poster child for the success of the Endangered Species Act. So you might wonder how something gets on the Endangered Species Act. Now, my caveat here is that I pulled this from a document that was produced last year, and I'm not sure that this is exactly the timelines that I'm going to quote. I'm not sure they're exactly right now, but this is how it was said to happen last year. Fish and Wildlife Service may know about a species that needs protection. And so every year they do a status survey and they assess whether it's time to do something about it now or whether it can wait. Or they might receive a petition which anyone or any group could say there's a real problem with spotted owls in the Northwest and we want you to take a look at this. They have 90 days to address the petition to determine if there is a substantial risk to that species. And if there is they have to do a further status review. If it's not substantial, they can just address the petition by file 13. If it is substantial, then they're required to do a status review and make a 12-month finding of whether protections are warranted, and if not, well, then it's done. Okay, we've looked at it, we've examined it, protections are not warranted. If they are warranted, then they have to decide, is it immediate? Do we have to do it now? Or is it warranted, but there's some factor why we can't do it now, or it can wait a little bit, we want to keep looking at it. And then it goes into that bucket of assessed candidates. And that assessed candidates bucket gets recycled every year. They have to go through and do a new review every year to see if now is the time for these. These are the ones that are going to end up sometime being on the list. So once they decide that these have fallen out and they're ready to be listed, they have to publish a proposed rule. They have 60 days. They have to allow 60 days for public comment. And within that 60 days, someone can ask to hold a hearing. And if a hearing is requested, then they have to hold the hearing, and all of this has to take 12 months. If they're either going to end up with a final rule at the end, or they're going to withdraw the rule. So here are some butterflies in Texas. The Frosted Elfins I've already talked about a little bit. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was doing some research on it. The Arago skipper, the bay skipper, the byssus skipper, and the Duke skipper all are listed by Xerces as vulnerable. Monarchs, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, last year proposed for listing. It is listed in Texas Parks and Wildlife Service, but the other 5 aren't listed in Texas, and none of them are listed nationally at this point. But they are at risk. Here's the proposed rule that they published on December 12th, 2024 regarding the monarch. We propose to add the monarch butterfly as a threatened species to the list of endangered and threatened wildlife with protective regulations under Section 4D of the Act, and we propose the designation of critical habitat for the species. Now, I've seen some headlines, clickbait, if you will, on people complaining about all this. It says critical habitat for the species. All those farmers in the Midwest are not going to be able to grow any of their crops because they're going to have to plant milkweed everywhere. It's not so. The designation of critical habitat for the species covers 5 small tracts. It's 4 or 5, I think it's 5, small tracts of land on the California coast where some eucalyptus trees grow, and that's where the western monarchs overwinter. So there is a small amount of land that is proposed for protection, but it's not the whole United States. And here's where I'm going to ask how much more time I have. Have I talked too long? Oh, I think we'll be okay. I think we'll be okay. Okay, let's look at the 5 or the 6 that I mentioned. Frosted Elfins. I'm going to show you a map like this for all of the different ones. This is from the butterfliesandmoths.org, as I mentioned, and any of the brown circles are historical data prior to 2005. Any of the purple circles are since 2005. People have listed that they have seen the butterflies. So this is, it looks like there are some areas that had them historically, a few still have them or maybe don't have them, and there are some new ones. I'm going to zero in a little bit on Texas, and I'm a little suspect about all of the things because if you notice, that's about where Hagerman was, and it has a brown circle, but I know I've listed them, so There may be small numbers still available in those places, but you can see that there's a lot more new listings than there are old ones, and that comes from that study that NABA did. The map on the right is from iNaturalist, and people are still seeing them and still logging new sightings. The ones at Hagerman are doing pretty well, so. Oh, I should point out that Oklahoma also has some pretty good populations in the Chickasaw Nation and the Choctaw Nation. Oh, and one other thing that I forgot to point out. If you notice, back on this first one, you're going to see a lot of maps like this. And if you see a gap down the middle like this, but populations on either side, it probably is because there is a subspecies, that each of those are separate subspecies of the same butterfly, and I'll talk about it when I get to each of them. So we have two primary subspecies of Frosted Elfin. There actually are 3 subspecies, but one we think is completely gone. It was a small subspecies that was only seen in the Carolinas, and I don't think they've seen one of those in years. So on the East Coast, they're subspecies of Calliferous iris, and where we are, it's Calliferous iris hadros. We have 1 flight a year. They come out around early to mid-March, and by the end of April, the adults are gone. They have a short life cycle as an adult. When they come out of their chrysalis as adults, their first thing they want to do is mate, and they do that for about the next 6 weeks and lay eggs on their host plant. Their life cycle is entirely tied to the phenology of that host plant. It's the yellow wild indigo, Baptisia sphaerocarpa, and it's a member of the pea family. So they'll lay the eggs on the emerging flower buds. The eggs will hatch. The caterpillars will feed on that plant, never leaving that plant for their entire time until they're big enough that they will drop to the ground, form a chrysalis, bury themselves a little bit into the dirt, and wait for next year. It's a pretty amazing little thing, but on the day that I see the first Baptisia just poking out of the ground, that's when I'm going to see my first Frosted Elfin. I don't know how they know, but they do. The adult flight is typically close to the ground, and you have to almost walk through the field to get them to come up. They'll pop up, they'll fly a little ways, and then they'll go down as far as they can. So they're kind of secretive little things, and that's why nobody really knew they were around. They often land on dead twigs or grasses. They'll feed on flower nectar from a lot of low-growing things like 10-petal anemone, or they do feed on the wild indigo, but other low plants. You don't usually see them way up in the redbud or anything like that. Their populations are often small and local, but they are found, every year I find new places they are on the refuge. It's really cool. We maintain the quality and the quantity of suitable habitat for these butterflies. The picture on the left is what I usually see in March. There's a dead twig, and I scare up a butterfly, and it lands on the twig, and it looks like a dead leaf. The one in the middle, that one is just about ready to form its chrysalis. If you're familiar with any of the wild indigos, you know their leaves are probably only about that big, and it's only about 1/3 of the length of that leaf. So it's a little thing. And another very interesting thing is the host plant for these particular Frosted Elfins is the yellow wild indigo. In other parts of the country, they might be on a white wild indigo, or they might be on lupin. And in those other places, their caterpillars are green. But ours are bright yellow because of the yellow wild indigo. And the other way we can see these caterpillars is to go out after dark with a UV light because they luminesce. They're so cool. We maintain the fields both by mowing and burning. And you might think that burning, you know, I've already said they're on the ground. They're burrowed in a little bit. You might think that might affect them in some way. The first time it happened, I was a little panicky, and I was unaware that they were going to burn the field. I was gone for the summer. I came back and, you burned that field? And formed a plan that in the spring, if I would go out there and if I didn't find any butterflies in that field where I knew there should be, I would capture some caterpillars from another area where I knew they were, and I would transmigrate them so that we would repopulate that area. But sure enough, they were there in the spring, so they are apparently far enough underground that a prescribed burn, which is quick and not that hot on the soil, doesn't harm them. So I'm comfortable with burning now. This is the same field 2 months apart. One was February, one was April. And you can see how lush the field is after a prescribed burn.
That picture taken?
That's taken on Sandy Point Road at Hagerman. So the next one I'll talk about is the Aragos skipper. This one was primarily one that was seen in the middle of the country, and apparently still is in some areas, but Texas does not seem to have a lot of them at this point. If I look on Naturalist, I don't find very many sightings of this butterfly at all. It historically was found in Grayson County, but has not been seen as far as I know. There was one found in 2022 at Clymer Meadow. It once populated the entire eastern seaboard from New Jersey to Florida and the central states from Minnesota to Texas. It likes big blue stem, that's the host plant, or other prairie grasses, but it requires relatively undisturbed grasslands, which is why it was found at Clymer Meadow. Most places, there isn't undisturbed grassland prairie, sand prairies, or, I can't read it, pine barrens, essentially. The adults will feed on all kinds of flowers. It's a pretty nondescript little butterfly, but we have never found it at the refuge, and it hasn't been found in Collin County, nor has it been found very many places in Texas. I included the bay skipper, even though that's nowhere near us. This one is strictly a coastal butterfly, and you can see how small its area is and was. It was first discovered in 1989, and it was named for the location it was found, Bay San Luis in Mississippi. It's morphologically similar to a Dion skipper, which we do have in both of our counties. And if it's here, it might be mistaken for that. Well, this one won't be here because it wants salt marsh grasses, and it's only around the Gulf Coast. We don't have the right habitat for it. But I'll tell you why. If I can get a little closer, I will show you why they say it's morphologically similar to a Dion skipper. Dion skipper is a yellow butterfly, pretty nondescript, but it has two rays, like right there and right there. And you can see a hint of that on this bay skipper. So that's why they say it is morphologically similar and could be mistaken. The next one is Bisis skipper. I often wonder why they name things what they do. A problema bisis? I'm not sure what that's all about. But again, we have that separation between two heavily populated areas, but a lot less sightings currently. There is one brood per year in June to July, which means I'm never going to find it because I go to New Hampshire. It's native to Midwestern tall grass prairie. They did find one at Caddo Grasslands in 2011. Actually, there were a couple of, in 2011, there were a couple of people who logged it on different days, but it was only that year that we had that. This photo I picked off of iNaturalist, and it was taken by Greg Lasley. And if anybody's going to find something, he would have been the one. So there are the subspecies that is in the Midwest is Problema bisis subspecies kumskaka. The larval host is eastern grammagrass, which we've had growing on the refuge, so it certainly would be possible that it could be there. And they may also use big blue stem. It overwinters as fourth instar caterpillars and then starts feeding again in the spring. It pupates in dense silk cocoons in litter at the base of the host plant and waits for next year. They nectar on flowers, including buttonbush. Next one is dukes. Again, separation between areas. This photo was taken in Hardin County in southeast Texas, where there was one. You can see it's another yellow butterfly, has those hints of rays on the side of the hind wing. The closest record to us was from Texarkana when I looked on iNaturalist. Its larval host is the shoreline or thin-scale Carrick sedge, a plant that was identified on the refuge in 1999. But this one likes marshy areas. And we've had so many floods lately that I think all of our marshy areas, if they were there, they got drowned. It's marshy areas, tupelo swamps, and ditches. So I'm not sure we will find one on the refuge. There are at least 2 broods from June to September, and the fourth instar caterpillars overwinter. And then we have the monarch. And again, there have to be purple under those browns because we all are seeing monarchs. So instead, I picked the iNaturalist. And yeah, they're seeing them everywhere. You can see where the major cities are and places where people are out looking, and you can see that there's a lot of attention, and you can see on the West Coast those little sites where they overwinter, so on the face of it, you might think they're doing okay, but their numbers are down every year. We have a good year, then it's followed by a bad year. So they do still need protection at this point. It's widespread throughout the US. Did everybody see them all in late October? I tagged 49 at the refuge. I was so excited. The population is steadily declining despite efforts. They have their massive migrations to overwintering sites in California and Mexico. Everything west of the Rocky Mountains goes into California. Maybe not everything. Some of them may go down into Mexico a little bit. But the ones that we are tracking, the ones that go by us, are heading for Mexico. It's from all across the eastern side, everything east of the Rockies. They feed on flower nectar from a variety of species, and during migration, they may roost together overnight, but they do not really travel together. They do not flock. They are not like birds. They are not social at all. I had to go on business to Altoona, Pennsylvania, and would you believe they actually have an airport in Altoona, Pennsylvania? And it was an interesting place. We got on the plane and flew to Altoona, and then landed in what looked like between two cornfields. And they drove us up to the back door of this building that looked like somebody's home. And we got out and walked in, and that was it. Well, when it came time to leave, they have one departure lounge. And you can only go into the departure lounge through the screeners when it's your turn to board. They will only have one plane at a time in there. So we got into the departure lounge and they said, oh, there's something wrong with the plane. You have to leave. And we'll let you know when you can come back. So I went out. There's no place to really sit there. It's not like a real airport. So I went out for a little walk. And down the road a little bit, there was this huge area of goldenrod. And so I just was looking to see what I'd see, and along comes a monarch, and it goes and gets a little nectar from a goldenrod and flies on. And I'm still standing there, and about 30 seconds later, maybe a minute, another one comes along, follows the same route, gets a little nectar and moves on. This went on for several minutes while just every 30 seconds to a minute, a different monarch would come along. This is the way they migrate. You know, they're all individuals, but they all kind of know the same place to go. During winter, they're going to feed on flowers, but on warm days, but they're not likely to mate. I say not likely to because they're supposed to be in reproductive diapause, but sometimes things happen that encourage them to mate. Either they find some milkweed that is conducive, and that triggers them to mate and lay eggs that will be unviable, or somebody finds one that they think it needs help, I better take it inside and warm it up because it's not moving, and that kicks them out of their normal cycle. Let them do their thing and they'll be fine. Their larval host is milkweed, we all know that, and native milkweed is preferable in all areas. The population around Houston no longer migrates because they have viable milkweed year-round. Yeah, except that doesn't let them be it doesn't let them be as they're supposed to be, and it also creates a hotbed for parasitic infections because they're stuck in one area and they infect each other and they infect their offspring. So, native milkweed. Carol will be happy that I said that. All butterfly migrations are atypical because most migrations are a species that goes from one area to another area to breed or to spend the winter. And the same adults will go in both directions. And they may go in both directions multiple times. And they learn from the others that have done it before where to go. And they'll return back to the same place. If you heard the goose thing, They go to the same places. Butterflies have such a short lifespan that the same adult that starts in, I don't know, Ohio, flies down through Texas, goes down to Mexico, isn't going to make it much beyond the Texas border. It's their offspring that will go the next 500, 700 miles and lay eggs and have babies. And that offspring will go further north. A lot of butterfly migrations are just a hop north. Let's see here. I guess I've said everything that needs to be said here. There is this gentleman, or was this gentleman, named Harlan Radcliffe, who was a man after my own heart. He worked at the same place in Iowa for years and years. And every day he would go out and have his lunch outside at the picnic table. And every year he looked at the monarchs and he kept track of when he saw the first monarch and what they were doing and when they had babies and oh, the new monarchs emerged. And he would take note of the last time he saw one. And over 17 years of data, the monarchs started migrating 9 days later. That was correlated to the later availability of maturing milkweed. It all kind of is in the similar, it's global warming or climate change or whatever you want to call it. And plants are changing, our range maps are changing, and it is changing the wildlife. And the problem is, there was a study based on his findings that wanted to see the viability of a monarch larva if the egg was introduced earlier or later in the milkweed maturation cycle. And they found that the later they are, the more hazards they meet on the way south. They are not finding the things that they know instinctively to feed on. It's really messing with things. We participate in the Integrated Monarch Monitoring Program. Adele is one of my monitors. Where's Adele? She's way in the back. We go out. We have 2 field sites that we monitor. This is a national program that collects milkweed, nectar plant, and monarch use data from various land use types and regions. So we have these 2 fields that we monitor. Each one we monitor 3 times in the spring and hopefully twice in the fall. We weren't able to do the fall monitoring this year because of the government shutdown, but we will get back to it in the spring. Each one of those fields we go to twice, and we look at, I'll give you an example. We have a March grid that we have, and each one of those dots, for 100 dots, we look at a square meter of land and check what is blooming, what is available for monarchs to nectar on. We also look for what milkweed is available. And if there is milkweed available, are there eggs or larvae on that milkweed? We also look for adults and what they're doing. Are they flying? Are they nectaring? Are they mating? Are they laying eggs? Whatever they're doing. We collect all that data, and I submit it online to Journey North. I believe it's Journey North. I do it too. I have like 3 different monarch sites that I submit data to. So, and with that data, The goals are to understand how the monarchs are interacting with their environment, to document conservation efforts, to find out, we always have to say, is the site at risk of anything? Is there anything encroaching on it? Has there been any damage to it? All of that data is needed, and to track the population and its habitat as it and they change over time. And the compiled results are part of one of those 345 surveys that went into that study that said butterfly numbers are decreasing. So it feels like we're doing something important. We also tag monarchs. For those who aren't familiar, the tagging season around here historically should have begun in mid to late September. Anyone who is watching monarchs knows that it's pushing out later and later. This year, the peak week was October 21st to 28th. Agree? Yeah. Without a doubt, it's getting later. We capture a monarch by hand. We identify the gender of the monarch. We place a sticky label on the hindwing cell and press it a little bit to make sure it seals, then release the monarch, and off it goes to Mexico. Anyone along the way who sees one can take a picture of it and log it and say, I saw this tagged monarch, so they can track where they're going. They can find out later in the season, once all the data is in, where that monarch was tagged. But the other important thing is, if the monarchs don't survive the winter, that's when the tags get recovered. Not all the monarchs that make it to Mexico do survive, and they can see the viability by percentages of how many were tagged and how many did not make it through the winter. Anyone can help. You can report your first spring sighting of adult monarchs. Our first in 2024 was on the 18th of March. Anytime around then is when you're going to see them. You can report your first spring emergence of milkweed. You can also report your first eggs or caterpillars. journeynorth.org/monarchs has all kinds of season-specific activities that you can do. Good thing to do with kids. You can report all your additional monarch sightings as often as once a week. And you can sign up for migration news. Here are some resources. The Friends of Hagerman website, it's www.friendsofhagerman.org. If you go there, there's a whole bunch of information about butterflies and other wildlife too. I'm sure Brian's going to have a bat page soon. Among the things that are in there, there's the Beyond the Butterfly Garden series. There's a list of host and nectar plants for the butterflies that we expect to see in our garden. You'll see the yearly census of what butterfly species have been seen on the refuge. You'll find a Texas Parks and Wildlife thing that they did, brochure on introduction to butterfly watching. And you'll find a lot of pretty pictures. These are my favorite field guides. I always use both the Kaufman Field Guide to Butterflies of North America and Jeffrey Glassberg's, that's the one that's put out by NABA, a Swift Guide to Butterflies of North America. And then there's places to go online, butterfliesandmoss.org, iNaturalist. Please log all of your butterflies into iNaturalist. And at-risk butterflies and moss from the Xerces Society. And that is all I have. And does anyone have questions?